My Lords, what a privilege to follow the fourth of those four outstanding maiden speeches. May I reassure the noble lady Baroness Hazarika that I echo her sense that Baroness Berger's humanity and dignity in the face of extraordinary provocation was an inspiration not only to the many people who uphold the best and most decent tendencies in the Labour Party, but I think to everyone in this country who values tolerance, religious pluralism, civility in public discourse, and the supremacy of parliamentary life. I hope I won't destroy her credibility when I say that of all the people in the independent group, she was the only one I was secretly rooting for during that bizarre moment in our political life. And what a pleasure also to follow my friend of 3.5 decades, the Baroness Cash. I remember seeing a picture of my noble friend, I think in the Observer in about 2009, with the most extraordinary array of lefty lawyers, including, if memory serves, the Baroness Chakrabarti and also the Baroness Kennedy of the Shores. And they were making this great defence of liberty. And that, I think, has been her core belief throughout her political career. Very apt that when she stood for another place, she fought in Westminster, the constituency of both J.S. Mill and of John Wilkes. If there's one precept that this country has developed and exported and contributed thereby to the happiness of humanity, it is personal autonomy. But of course, my real privilege is in following and welcoming my noble friend, Lord Young. He is, I think, a one-man advertisement for the hereditary principle. It's an unfashionable cause to be making at a time like this. He didn't mention that his father was a Labour peer. I mean, you'd have got it if you were listening between the lines. And his father was best known for writing a book called Meritocracy, which he was against. And my noble friend, I think, has had a career that tests the outer limits of what we understand by meritocracy. Actually, right from the start, he got into Oxford on the basis of having received an acceptance letter in error. They posted it by mistake, even though he'd failed to make the grades. And he then successfully argued that they had a moral obligation to take him anyway. And so he went on to have this extraordinary career, which I can really only describe as cinematic. Cinematic, actually, in the literal sense, in that a film was made of my noble friend's life. He was played by Simon Pegg in 2008. I think the only other person I can think of who's had a biopic before he was elected to anything is the current Vice President of the United States, but I'm not going to push that resemblance. And my noble friend then went on again and again to show that quirkiness, that independence of character, and that courage that is, I think, one of our greatest virtues as a people. I mean no disrespect to our political system when I say that you can get to this chamber by being careful and correct and conformist in your views. I know one or two people who have made it to the top in politics by waiting until everyone else has spoken before they express a view, by knowing how to nod sagely and talk slowly. No one would describe my noble friend in such terms. And the two particular causes with which he has been most recently associated, the Free Speech Union and the Critic, which began as an anti-lockdown campaign, showed extraordinary moral courage. Not the simple courage which some people have and some don't, but that readiness, that intellectual readiness to be incredibly unpopular, but to stand by a position that you know to be right. And personally, I have to say, on the lockdown, I remember the days when people were accusing him of being a eugenicist and a mass murderer and all the rest of it. With every day that has passed, he has come to be more and more vindicated. Turning to the bill itself, I can be very brief. I'm afraid, my lords, I find it contains absolutely no redeeming qualities whatever. I could go on at length about what's wrong with it, but I'd be repeating many of the arguments we've already heard, not least from my noble friends Baroness Coffey and Baroness Noakes. I will focus on just one solitary provision, which is the rights to work from day one. I think we are in real danger in this nation of having more and more workers' rights and fewer workers. Because here is an unpopular truth, something that people very rarely like to admit and never really like to verbalise. The way of encouraging people to hire is to make it easier for them to fire. The way in which you encourage employers to take on more staff is to give them the reassurance that they're not going to be stuck with duds or embroiled in weeks and weeks of acrimony for the price of a second-class stamp or an email by somebody who they had then to remove from employment. And that, my lords, has been the secret of our country's success for some 3 decades. Whatever the world has thrown at us, the global financial crisis, the pandemic, structural employment has always been higher here than in Europe because we have this relative flexibility in our labour market, which means that we bounce back very quickly from downturns because companies are prepared to take people on. And I think that is ceasing to be the case now. Now, I speak as the father of 2 children who are just entering the workplace. I listen to what their friends are saying. If you speak to anyone of that age, there is a palpable freeze now, an uncertainty among employers in anticipation, both of this bill which we're discussing now and the related rise in national insurance. And I have a fear that those 30 years of structurally low unemployment are about to come to an end. You'll be able to look back at my words and laugh at me if I've got this wrong. But I suspect that we're at the beginning of what is going to be a sustained and secular rise in unemployment. As I say, I hope to heaven that I'm mistaken about that. But as Scotland's national poet once said, forward though I canna see, I guess, and fear.